All right, welcome. This is the brainstorming video. And despite the pushback that I've received in some cases, I'm still wearing my Black Lives Matter shirt because I care about the subject. And so if this is pushing ideas on you, then so be it. But it's no different than any of the ways that instructors have presented their ideas in a way to make students think, and really the impetus for this whole unit, and originally was going to be just on race, because I was so upset at the time of the murder of multiple African Americans, earlier this year: Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, then later Jacob Blake, and then just the other day, a young man in Vancouver from Camas, right? Which we don't know all the facts on that yet. So, but it's not, in my mind, enough to be just against racism. It's important to be anti-racist. And white silence equals white consent. And if you've ever been in the uncomfortable position when someone used the N-word around you and you didn't take a stand, if someone told a racist joke around you and you didn't take a stand, oh, hey, that's just grandpa or whatever, that's what this is about. And so that was the journey for me. And it's why I made comments in class about white privilege, because I'm still on my journey to figure out how to navigate my own white privilege, to be the best human I can be, because for me it's about humanism. It's about being the best human I can be, and fulfilling really the main ideas, the credo of most world religions, which really boil down to be nice, boil down to the golden rule, which I know a lot of you appreciate. And so as an individual of empathy and compassion for other humans, I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to fulfill really the spirit of the things that my mother taught me. Not to, play on your sympathy. No, actually, to totally play on your sympathies, because that's called pathos, appeal to pathos. So this is the video about brainstorming. And really, I want to walk you through sort of a step-by-step procedure for approaching this assignment and deciding what you think about the issue that you decide to write about. Because this assignment is not about what I think, and it's not about pleasing me with what you write about. It's about finding your voice, finding what you think, defending that, and trying to persuade a reader about that. And so I want to start with addressing the claim, because it's an argumentative claim for sure, that I was trying to push my ideas on you with class presentations, and that is somehow bad. And of course, my goal is to create a safe space in the classroom for you to think for yourself and to employ good critical thinking skills. The end goal here is simply whether or not you can write a strong argumentative essay in which you defend your views ethically, logically, and yet not without passion, not without emotional appeal, in which you defend your ideas with credible support, corroborated from multiple sources and multiple perspectives, in which you write with reasonable tone and clarity without being hostile or engaging in hate speech, in which you examine both sides of an issue and shape your argument to defend a position and show other positions as weaker. But even that is an oversimplification, because few issues truly have just two sides. That's a gross oversimplification. That is what we're experiencing in this country, where we have this divisiveness of this camp and this camp. And I always felt myself as sometimes a member of one camp and sometimes a member of another camp. And so maybe somewhere in the middle. But the middle has become less and less of a position that people can take in the country in the last few years. And that really bothers me. I think we need a coming together. I think we need a understanding of what other humans go through, and then respectfully disagreeing with others if they present views in a respectful, ethical, logical way. So we have to wonder, why are we afraid of views that are not our own? Why do people have such a violent, strong reaction to a view that they don't share? Where is the growth? Where is the education of the mind without examining the views that we don't know about, or the views that we have rejected that are not our own? How can we even argue for our own views without understanding the views of others? They actually did a study. They actually did a study with people in terms of how they decide what political candidate they're gonna vote for. And I'm careful here because I don't endorse political candidates. But when they did this study, people were happy to read a position that already agreed with their narrative, that agreed with their story, that agreed with what they believed in or believed they believed in. But they were frequently unwilling to listen to the opposite point of view. They didn't even want to engage with it. They were given the choice to read it before they made their decision. It was a multi-step study of a variety of decisions, and many people declined to even read the opposing view. How are we supposed to be able to argue for a view, argue for a point of view, try to persuade others that don't agree, if you don't even try to understand what those people believe that you're trying to persuade? The whole point of persuasion is to understand the mindset of your audience and to attempt to persuade them to feel as you do, using good persuasive strategies. Be ethical, speak reasonably, in a way that you can be trustworthy, in a way that you don't turn off your audience, which I may have risked with my passion. But also, you have to have passion. You have to have an emotional appeal, and you have to be logical. And I hope that what I'm saying is logical, because it's got a long educational history, and it's not just me that is saying these things. On the other hand, I feel very safe teaching concepts related to anti-racism and Black Lives Matter this year. I feel very safe because as a whole, our college has come out and said that we're committed to these concepts. And so this is part of education. Years ago, when I started here at LCC, and it was a new environment for me and a little bit more of a conservative community than I'm used to. And so I went to the dean and I said, these are the things I'm teaching about racism. I'm teaching Between the World and Me. I'm teaching about anti-racism. I'm teaching about white privilege, and I'm getting some pushback. And do you support academic freedom? Do you support my ability to present these ideas so that students can make up their own minds about these ideas? It doesn't make any sense to me to not present these ideas as if I'm sticking my head in the sand and I'm not going to pay attention to the things in the world that could have the power to upset me. There's being offensive for no good reason. And then there's what John Lewis called good trouble. And my dean said, this is good trouble, that education is about confronting the dissenting views and making up your own mind. And so if you can't confront the dissenting views, perhaps you need to go to a school that only teaches one perspective, rather than a school that's open to all perspectives, like this one, and like in my case. Now, that said, you would think that I would not veto any subjects, but I did want to focus your work for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into another time, perhaps. And I have my own personal comfort zone. And so abortion is pretty much the main subject for which I don't want to read about. So I present these ideas for your consideration. There may be Often they may be my ideas. That's why I'm the professor. I am one who professes. And if this was a literature course in which I was giving my interpretation of a Hawthorne story, rather than views about white privilege, would that be quite as controversial? I teach from my perspective and my experience and my knowledge base. What else do I have? How can I teach from someone else's experience and knowledge base? That's not my experience and knowledge base. So it seems sort of fatuous to say that I am trying to push ideas onto students. I am simply presenting ideas for consideration and strongly stressing that I want you to make up your own mind. And I think I'm pretty clear in how I say that. And so if I talk about the new Jim Crow, I don't present it as, hey, here's this book, and I agree with 100% of what's in this book, and you should too. Instead, I say, here's this book I read, it was very interesting, and this is the argument this book makes. And when I talk about white privilege, I'm talking about the arguments that are made by the writers that I have put in the list of choices. And since almost all of you are white students, or students that I should say identify as white, as I am, I think that is super relevant, especially this year. But I know that these ideas have the power to upset people, and that's okay. I'm okay with that because I think that reaction is important, and I allow. I hate this phrase, I guess, but I allow space for that. But I don't present ideas in, you better agree with this idea or you will not get a good grade in this class. I mean, first of all, there are no grades in this class. But second of all, I very strongly and passionately believe that I want you to think for yourself. There are only good arguments that reach their audiences ethically and reasonably, and then those that do not. And so when I assess arguments, my job is not to decide whether I agree with you. My job is to decide whether or not you persuade your audience ethically and reasonably with logic and good evidence, and that you corroborated your evidence, and that you make an argument that has multiple parts and that has multiple perspectives, and that you're not ignoring anything super obvious, and you haven't engaged in logical fallacies, and that you have actually considered the opposite view, even though there aren't ever just two views, really. That's just ridiculous. So that's all for now. Maybe another video, but that's the core of these ideas. Just realize that college is here to put ideology in front of you that you can accept or reject, but not to perpetuate your narrative, not to shield you from things you find uncomfortable, and not to be free from bias, which is completely and totally impossible when one chooses to engage with ideas, with all ideas. There's going to be bias and perspective on that, you know, and it's the same idea that when you write a persuasive essay, all you're supposed to do is present the two sides of the issue, which again is fallacious because there aren't just two sides to any issue, but you present the two sides of the issue and let the reader make up their mind. No, no, no. The goal is to persuade the reader, which means you are totally coming from a position of bias, but you have to be reasonable in how you treat the oppositional view. And when you refute that view, and when you argue for your views, you have to be reasonable and logical and ethical, and show that you have empathy and compassion for other human beings. Because I respect everybody's right to an opinion, as long as you are not arguing for violence against other human beings, you're not arguing for hate against other human beings, and you're not arguing for brutality against people that can't defend themselves, like children or small animals. You know, those things I reject, and I have no respect for those things. So our focus is prejudice, because issues related to it affect us all. It's important to try to be the best kind of humans we can be on this planet. And I think most people share that, because one of the things that we have to commit ourselves to do in a persuasive essay is to establish common ground with the audience. We must decide how we feel about prejudice, and perhaps our audience feels the same way. And I hope that's what I've done with these very impassioned words to the beginning of this video about brainstorming, because it's really important to establish common ground with you so that you understand that perhaps, even if you disagree with what I have to say about white privilege, and even if you disagree with what I have to, or what the book by Michelle Alexander has to say about the new Jim Crow, even if you disagree with the fact that people like Ta-Nehisi Coates has to write a survival manual for his 15-year-old son so he doesn't get killed because he's a Black man in our culture. You know, even if you don't agree with those things, even if you don't agree with the fact that Black Lives Matter is just a group of people that are fighting against systemic racism and the oppression of African-American people that other people of other races don't experience. Even if you don't agree with those things, perhaps you agree that it is important for us to be the best humans we can be and treat others with love and kindness, and that you and I agree about that. And if you and I agree about that, we have a starting place to have the conversation that would be a persuasive argument. And so that's what you need to think about with whatever issue you choose to write about. What's your common ground with your audience? In fact, I don't even have this in my notes because I just hit it because I was so amped up. Common ground, and I'll just put a big exclamation mark there. So, all right. So I was going to run this in class, and I was going to do this thing where I say, forget about academic essays for a minute. You know, what are the stages of an argument? You know, and if I'm going to convince you of something, how would I go about doing that? What's most convincing in an argument? What type of strategy should I employ? And of course, I just told you one, you know, so maybe we will come back to this in the class just to see if you've watched the video by the next class period. Because common ground is really the first thing you should think about, and really the starting place for your persuasive essay. How do you establish common ground with your audience? So I could ask you some questions, you know, and see how you react to these questions, such as, how would you feel if I said there are only two genders and would not accept any other point of view? Or how would you feel if I said that Black people are lazy and don't care about being successful or bettering themselves in their communities, and so they spurn the help that they are offered? Or how would you feel about this idea? Jews are greedy, money misers who trick, cheat, and finagle people unfairly out of their hard-earned money. What do you think about the claim that Mexicans are coming up from Mexico to take the jobs of natural-born Americans willing to do the work for less pay and for longer hours? So these are just some of the questions that this unit should raise in examining prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination around issues related to race, gender, or other factors. And I could have come up with more questions, such as weight-related prejudice, or prejudice based on other religions than the ones I've named. So before I dig in too far here, I want to make clear the distinction between the words subject and topic. So try to be very careful for the rest of this video and in class to talk about, when I'm talking about the subject of your essay, I'm talking about the whole thing. I'm talking about the subject that you're tackling, that is expressed by your thesis. And when I say the word topic, I'm talking about parts of that subject. I'm talking about the topic sentences that lead your paragraphs, the claims, the arguments, the mini arguments that are part of the larger argument, because we use the word topic for topic sentence. And a lot of people use these words interchangeably. And I try to be really careful not to do that because I think it's confusing. So subject for the global subject of the whole thing, and topic for the parts of that subject. And so let's get in, let's talk about the pitch. And so this is actually not a bad time to share with you. I'm gonna move my notes over and share with you my my screen and talk about some of these issues. And I think this is the one I have open. And I haven't made a recorded video in a while that wasn't a live class, so this is special. Let me make myself bigger because I'm all about that. No, not really. So, so the pitch, the idea is to give you the opportunity to propose ideas, particularly one idea, as a starting point for pursuing your subject. And it's okay for your subject to change, and we'll talk about that. But I want to have some approval process to try to avoid the situation in which you get through a first draft and have to completely change your subject, because this happens frequently, quarter after quarter, where someone writes a first draft and then I give feedback in which I find logic flaws, and I find lack evidence, and I find things that are questionable ethics, and I find sources that lack credibility, and I find all of the flaws of a persuasive essay that are possible to have, and a student ends up changing their subject and doing a whole new essay. And certainly that's going to happen to some of you, but I want to try to avoid it happening to a lot of you by having you pitch an idea and having me pre-vet it to see if you're on the right track and you're good to go. And that's why I give you some articles to start with and see how we can do, right? And so I've already vetted the articles pretty much, and I'm pretty certain they all are. And if I missed one, I'll take it. But I'm pretty sure they're all opinion articles that express an opinion already. That gives you a really good starting point to either agree with the article or disagree with the article or reserve judgment, or feel like, okay, there's some things in this article I agree with and some things I think I may disagree with, and use that as a starting point to educate yourself. The other thing is the credibility of the source and, of course, of the author, which is part of the source. And so all of the articles that I've proposed and all of the sites that I've proposed for finding additional articles, if you don't like my choices, are vetted for credibility. And so how do I determine credibility? Well, of a source, I have to be able to determine that it's reasonably free of extreme bias. So it's not extreme left, it's not extreme right, it's closer in the middle, and it's got a fairly good reputation for factual accuracy. And so there are some independent reviews that you can use, like Media Bias Fact Check that I share on the page with the choices, that you can use to verify a source that's not on my list. The ones on my list are already verified. Outside of that, we might also look into the credentials of the author, because this is what I was mentioning where Medium is concerned, that sometimes you get an author like Devin Price, who's a social psychologist with a PhD, which is a reasonable start to verifying their credibility. Now, it doesn't mean that every single person with a PhD is instantly credible. This is absolutely not true, but it's a good starting point. Whereas, and I'll share next week an article by someone that tried to write about the COVID-19 pandemic, who really has no business writing about that and is not in any way an authority on the subject. Some like marketing person, not a scientist, not an epidemiologist, you know, and so, and that doesn't mean that people that aren't scientists are not credible when it comes to something like that, but they have to go the extra mile with extra evidence and with, you know, actually accurate data analysis, you know, and I have a good example of someone who completely didn't. And so I think it's a pretty good example for how we would vet the credentials of an author as to whether the author has the actual authority to write about a thing, right? So I'm going to redo this page and give it to you because it contains my old video from the spring that I don't want to use. But I have this article that I didn't put on the list, but it's from one of the sites that I did put on the list called Colorlines. And this site or this article is about Sikhs. And it's particularly about the prejudice against Sikhs. And it starts by telling a story about a Sikh from 30 years ago who was told he could not wear his turban while delivering the US postal mail. And so this flies in the face of the Constitution, which guarantees the free exercise of religion, particularly in cases where the exercise of your religion is not blowing up bombs in planes or something, which would be against the law for a different reason. Wearing a turban, as far as I know, is not against the law, but some research into that would be one of my first things to do. This is actually a pretty short article about this, and you're certainly welcome to use this if it inspires you, because you may be surprised to discover that really what I would hope for you would be to choose an article that you really don't know very much about and start an educational journey to learn about something new, because that's really what we're committed to. Unfortunately, most of the time, students, even when we instructors create assignments to try to force you into picking something new, most of the time students want to go with things they already know something about or already have formed some opinions about, or in some cases have already written a paper about. Some instructors feel very strongly about that and consider that self-plagiarism of yourself if you represent and repurpose a paper you've already written in a new class. I don't feel that way, but I certainly am hoping to try to encourage some of you to learn about something new. And so one of the best ways to try to come up with ideas, if you're not thrilled by any of the articles in my list, is to explore the sites and look for articles that intrigue you. And that's how I found this one on the Colorlines site. And I actually don't know anything about Sikhs. And so I am part of this group that in a way discriminates against them, because I actually don't know anything about them. But credibility, right? So first, what is Colorlines, you know, and who publishes Colorlines? Well, I'm not going to go through all the sites here, but if you go, well, actually, I am going to go through some. If you go to Media Bias Fact Check, there is no page for Colorlines. So then I got to try to verify the credibility of it a different way. Well, Colorlines is published by this organization called raceforward.org. So obviously the first step is looking at their site. The second step, since this doesn't tell me as much as I would like to know, though it looks reasonably good, is to look them up on Wikipedia, which is going to be relatively accurate in this situation, right? And when I do that and learn about this, I get a pretty good impression about the credibility of whatever would be presented on the Race Forward site and presented via then Colorlines. And there's even a bunch of resources here for me to read more. And just looking at a lot of these resources, I get a good impression about the credibility of these sources, many of which are scholarly articles from peer-reviewed academic journals, which is kind of the height of credibility. Not to say that everything in a scholarly journal is credible, because I actually have an article on my blog that argues against that. But generally speaking, by and large, most of the time, it's pretty good. So what would I do with the Sikhs thing? So, you know, let's say I have pitched that idea and I've gotten approval from my instructor. Then what am I going to do? Well, let me share this stuff with you right here. You need evidence. You need logic and reasoning. You need emotional appeals. And you need ethical source use that takes multiple perspectives and corroborates facts, which means you can't just take a key fact, an important fact. I mean, you don't have to necessarily corroborate everything in your essay, but if you have a key fact that's central to your argument and you just have it from one source and you haven't corroborated it from additional sources, then that's easy to argue against. You know, well, you know, how do we know that's true? Anybody else reported that? You know, so these are the things to start to think about as I brainstorm. So brainstorming for this assignment is a little bit different because the preparation work for an argumentative essay is really important. Now, you could just puke a bunch of stuff on the paper and then do more brainstorming and work it up, you know, and I've often done that. But I think there are some important steps to start with before you get to that stage. The question is, do you do pre-research brainstorm before you do any reading other than the one article maybe, right? Do you do any additional brainstorming for what do you already know? What do you know going into a project? And this can be a valuable step to see if it changes as you read and educate yourself. You know, so sometimes I'll do a little pre-writing. What do I already know about Sikhs, which in this case wasn't a whole lot. So you know, when I redo the blog, it will share some of that pre-writing, some of that brainstorming. But really, here's the process, right? Step one: read. Gather many sources. Educate yourself. Even if you already have an opinion formed about the issue that you've selected or think you know a lot about the issue, educate yourself, because none of us are experts. Even I'm not even an expert about the things that I think I'm an expert about. You know, I have to be constantly reading and learning and thinking and considering, and you should too. You know, that's how we grow. That's how we are able to make a strong intellectual argument that's reasonable and well considered. Because without this, it's not. And so even though I'm only requiring you to use 2 sources for the first draft and add a source for the second draft, so 3 sources minimum for the whole project, many of you will probably at least look at, if not cite and use, more than 3 sources. Now, I don't want this to be a 15-source research paper. That's not the intention of this assignment. But it is meant to get you to spend some time, and this could just be an hour or 2, more if you get excited, reading and thinking and considering and comparing sources to other sources and looking at what's out there. And so a couple more examples about that before I quit. Once you've done some reading and thinking and gathering of sources, you start to have some things in your brain and you can start to do some pre-writing and brainstorming, right? So if we go back to the page, the blog page, there is a bunch of things here for brainstorming, you know, and so I know a lot of you really like, you know, this kind of thing where you visually write out a lot of ideas, and that can be really great, you know, but I think it's much more useful after you've done a bunch of reading and you can start to connect ideas together. In fact, I might do something like that as I read, and draw out a cluster map. And so a lot of these links that I provided there show a lot of these strategies and are really worth some of your time to explore. For instance, this one, 8 brainstorming strategies for new writing ideas. You know, free writing, of course, is easy, but things like looping and listing and clustering and nutshelling, cubing, and of course, researching is one of these, is probably better, right? Or this one, in which I think it shows a cluster map when it loads, because I'm running all sorts of things, including the video. So, you know, the idea map, which many of you already do, is good. And so I might make this as I'm reading to make these connections between ideas, to start to think about my complex issue, because it's complex. It's a complex thing. And sometimes we just want the simplest argument, but it's not. It's not that simple. Like I had a student last year who really loved the soundbite that guns don't kill people, people do. And so you wouldn't blame a pencil for what was written. And he loved that. And that for him, that was his whole essay. That was all he had. And that's not enough. That doesn't persuade me. It's like, okay, that's interesting, but what about this? And what about this? And what about that? You know, like if I couldn't get the pencil, I couldn't write the thing. And then I wouldn't, you know, like if I couldn't get the gun, I couldn't kill the person. And then what about this? And, you know, so there's so many holes in that logically, right? And so you should be thinking that way too. What are the holes in this when we think logically? Because that's what you do. Because you're not going to persuade people that with things that don't have logic, you know? So you should be your own devil's advocate for stuff, you know, because that's the process. That's the process, you know, or get someone to be a devil's advocate for you about your idea, right? I thought this one was good. You know, it's got the same stuff with the listing and the clustering, but I like the asking questions. Sometimes interviewing yourself about your idea, or again, bouncing ideas off another person that's going to ask you questions, is a great brainstorming technique. And so I strongly recommend that you give that a try. So I think. So then after some brainstorming and pre-writing, you know, you're gonna want to go do more research and brainstorming and pre-writing, and then eventually an outline, because an outline is super crucial for an essay like this. And again, as an undergraduate at your stage of the game, I couldn't do an outline until I'd actually written out a draft, and then I could start to think about what's in my draft and what's not in my draft. And try to do that. But the more you engage in this process, the more you engage in the brainstorming, the pre-writing, the outlining, the better your first draft's going to be, and then ultimately the better all your drafts are going to be as you keep going, right? So I had a student say to me, well, can I write about Blue Lives Matter, the reaction to Black Lives Matter, that, hey, police lives matter too, because police put their lives on the line and police are killed, maybe even in greater numbers than the examples that we have of African Americans that the Black Lives Matter movement cares about. Well, one of the obvious counter arguments to that is that police know they're putting their lives on the line when they enter the police force, and they know that they could be killed as they fight crime and try to bring criminals to justice. That is a known risk. It's like going to war. If you go to war, you're not going to complain if you get killed because you knew you might get killed. Whereas a lot of the African Americans, if not all of them, that people are upset about are not expecting to be killed, particularly by police officers, you know. And so there's also those counter arguments that more Black civilians kill other Black civilians than police officers kill Black civilians. Well, that's also sort of a logically fallacious argument. you know. So part of our job here is to try to find these logically fallacious arguments, you know, flawed logic, fallacy. So I did some research into that, you know, because I said to the student, well, if you can come up with a credible source for Blue Lives Matter, then you can write about it. So I had some trouble with that. So I did find this. I couldn't find anything from 2020 though, so this really bothers me. So I would keep looking, see if I could find something credible from 2020. But this is pretty good. This is from 2017, you know, and it makes some really good arguments. And one of them here is the common refrain that blue lives don't exist because officers can take their uniforms off. In other words, they're not blue all the time. You know, and so that's just one of the starting points as we, you know, you got to think like the people that resist the direction you want to persuade, you know, and I got the impression that the student that asked me about this was not going to argue why Blue Lives Matter is a reaction, like all lives matter is a reaction, because the movement's called Black Lives Matter, not Black Lives Only Matter and No Other Lives Matter. It's called Black Lives Matter because it often seems like Black lives don't matter. So people are arguing that because it looks like Black lives don't matter, we're going to say Black lives matter too, you know, because sure, blue lives matter. People, you know, have made a big deal about that for a long time. Sure, all lives matter. You know, that's that common ground of empathy and compassion. Sure, they do. But that doesn't negate the fact that it seems like Black lives don't matter. And so we want to rise up and say, hey, we see some injustice here and we want something done about that. Okay. And so I thought this was a good article, but then I tried to find some others, but I couldn't find a credible one that argued that Blue Lives Matter is actually a legitimate, well, I don't want to say legitimate because it is legitimate. You know, certainly I don't want to see police officers killed. You know, like I agree with that. You know, but I couldn't find, I guess what I want to say is I couldn't find an article about Blue Lives Matter that in opposition to Black Lives Matter negated the importance of Black Lives Matter and elevated the importance of Blue Lives Matter instead of Black Lives Matter. So as I've said repeatedly, if you go with something I've already selected as the article, you're in better shape. But I've also said that I don't want you to just feed me what I want to hear, what you think I want to hear. I want you to think for yourself, and I want you to explore something that you care about, or you come to care about because you select something that you don't really know much about and you investigate it. Like this. It wasn't that long ago. I didn't even know who Ilhan Omar was. I'm sad to say. I'm not from Minnesota. So here's Vox. I don't think Vox is actually on my list of approved sites, but Vox is actually a pretty good site. I just didn't include it. You know, I couldn't include every single one. And so this is the article in our list. The attacks on Ilhan Omar reveal a disturbing truth about racism in America. If you don't know, Ilhan Omar is one of only 2 Muslim American women. She is an American citizen. She's from Somalia, who is a congressional representative. And she's a representative in the state of Minnesota. And she just won re-election. And the attacks on her, according to this article, show us the face of Islamophobia in America, show us racism and misogyny and anti-immigration rhetoric in America. And I find these things upsetting, particularly misogyny, actually, which if you don't know what that word means, you should check it out. But of course, you know, my first stop, and this was my first stop with the Sikh article too, was YouTube, you know, like, who is Ilhan Omar? So I looked up Sikhs. I didn't show you that, but I did it. I would look up Ilhan Omar, and this would just be the starting point. Of course, I hope you know to raid the reference list of anything that you look at, particularly Wikipedia. So if I go down to the bottom of Wikipedia, there's a list of 227 sources. So that's more than I could possibly look at, but certainly looking through here, I could find more if I wanted to, you know, and vet them. This is a quick way to get to a lot of material. Look at all these, it's a ton of stuff. Not all of it may be credible, but it's actually pretty good. And of course I got to that because I just Googled Ilhan Omar, you know, and when I did that, I got this YouTube video that I thought was pretty good. It was a message that Ilhan Omar made prior to this year's election to Muslim Americans. You know, how much do some of you actually know about Muslim Americans? You know, do you think it's important to know things like that? That's really kind of the issue. And of course, everything is loading very slowly. But see, the purpose of this assignment is to put you in a position to educate yourself. You know, I give you an opportunity to educate yourself. And even if you pick something that you already know something about, even if you pick something that you already have formed an opinion about, even if you pick something that you're receiving information from sources that I would consider not credible, even in those situations, you're in a position to educate yourself and to learn something, and think for yourself. And then we'll think together. The goal of this is to get you to develop strong critical thinking skills so you can think through a complicated issue and create a persuasive essay that really works to persuade the audience. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so this was a great article in the Washington Post, you know, and of course I'm not rejecting some of our great journalistic venues that have history that goes back, in some cases, a couple hundred years, like New York Times, and dismiss them as fake news because they're not. And so I do draw the line on some things, you know, and the Washington Post has certainly validated itself over and over and over again as an objective source when it's reporting news, and a thoughtful and insightful and intellectual source when it's reporting opinion, like this, which is the article that Ilhan Omar's story is complicated. Is unlike anyone who has served Congress before, which is the what's in the URL. So that's generally the thing. The upshot of all of this is to engage in the brainstorming, pre-writing, outlining quite a bit. In fact, that's why it's due so closely with the first draft, because you put a lot of effort into the brainstorming, pre-writing, outlining. You pretty much, the draft just probably will magically generate itself. But you know, I'm really looking forward to what you'll come up with. I'm really looking forward to how you will think about how to establish common ground with your reader. And so I'll leave you with this final thought. I am not the audience of your essay. That deserves a pause. I am not the audience of your essay. The audience of your essay are the people that would disagree with your thesis, which I might be, but I might not be. You got to think about the belief systems and the counter arguments and the the ways that those people who disagree with your thesis would disagree, and would fight back against what you're trying to persuade them and convince them to believe in. So we'll deal with more of that. We'll deal with counter arguments. We'll deal with a lot of this stuff in the upcoming. Hoping to make more videos in the Persuasive series that deal with this. I might even add this to the Persuasive series officially, because I kind of well, no, I have talked specifically about the assignment, haven't I? Oh well. All right. I hope this is helpful to you. As always, I appreciate you. I hope you appreciate me. I'm looking forward to what you come up with. See ya. Thanks a lot.